Well, good morning from California. Good afternoon, those of you on the East Coast. I am James Sparkman, and I'm with Alpha Education. And welcome to a panel on new markets to boost enrollment, hosted by LeadSquared. I am out here, as I said, in California. We're a little advisory firm based in Sausalito, California, just over the Golden Gate Bridge. We work with public and nonprofit universities around innovation, professional development, and partnerships. We also founded the P3DU event that's coming up this fall, our 5th year doing that at CU Denver. I'd like to jump right in with some housekeeping items, and so we can get right to our poll. Our panel. You all who are watching are muted for the duration of the panel. We're going to have a series of pop-up poll questions. We'd love your engagement, and we'd also love your engagement with Q&A. We're going to try to address those during the panel, and if there are questions we need to address afterwards, we can do that via email. I think that's it. Let's just jump right in for introductions to our 4 university panelists. I think we have an amazing group of kind of, unique superstars in their own way and bring kind of a unique perspective around innovation, enrollment, and entering new markets from different institutional advantages. And I'm going to ask the panelists to self-introduce and maybe just a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your institution to kind of give us context. So I'm going to start and ask Betty Jo, could you maybe introduce a little bit about yourself?
Well, thank you, James, so much for hosting us today as our moderator, and thank you to LeadSquared and Inside Higher Ed as well. My name is Betty Jo Boucher. I serve as the Vice Provost of Digital Strategy and Operations at National Louis University. We're an access-focused Hispanic-serving institution in Chicago. And at NLU, I have the pleasure of focusing in on online and digital education across our institution, as well as learning design and accelerated pathways to graduation. So look forward to spending more time with you today around the growth of online. I'm going to pass the ball to Monica to introduce herself as well.
Thank you, Betty Jo. Good morning and good afternoon. I'm Monica Carson, Chief Growth Officer here at American College of Education. I've actually been in higher education going on 20 plus years, to where I've spent about 10 years of my experience at American College of Education, and then the other portion of my career, most of it spent actually at Grand Canyon University. At American College of Education, we are a fully online higher education institution that focuses on a wide range of degree programs, from micro-credentials all the way to doctoral degrees. And our focus really has been on creating accessible, affordable, and quality education, primarily for those that serve in education, healthcare, and the nursing field. So I'm just super excited to be here today and appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all. And I will pass it on to Amar.
Thank you, Monica, and hello, everyone. Thank you, James, for hosting us today, and also Inside Higher Ed and LeadSquared. I'm excited to be with all of you today, right here in sunny Los Angeles. My name is Amar Dalal, and I serve as the Assistant Vice Provost for Graduate Enrollment at Loyola Marymount University. LMU is a private liberal arts institution with over 10,000 students, most of whom are undergraduate. About 70% of our students are undergraduate students. We have over 30% of our students in graduate programs and also in law programs. And I'm particularly excited about today's discussion because I've spent a good half a decade researching the institutional perspective on insourcing versus outsourcing, and really sort of the build or buy decision that many institutions have dealt with, particularly throughout the pandemic, as they've thought about scaling and upscaling their online programs. So I'm looking forward to being alongside my panelists here. And now I'll turn it over to Stephanie.
Great, thanks, Amar. Hi, everybody, and happy Tuesday to you. My name is Stephanie Henshaw, and I'm the Executive Director of the Butler Beyond Transformation Lab at Butler University. A little bit about Butler is we are a private liberal arts college in Indianapolis, Indiana. So we're not as sunny today. Well, actually, we do have a little bit of sun, but not as sunny as probably what Amar is experiencing. We have created actually the Transformation Lab, which is the unit I'm accountable for at Butler, to be able to really explore new markets and new opportunities to diversify our enrollment. Right now, we are primarily undergraduate residential university. However, with all the differences happening in higher ed right now, the demographic cliff, which we all know, Butler wanted to be very strategic about a way to be able to prioritize new markets and new opportunities. Thus, the Transformation Lab was formed. So basically, the Transformation Lab is a mini R&D unit within the university that allows us to be able to explore, validate, vet, and design new models of education. So looking forward to talking with everybody today, learning from everybody, and really tackling the big issues that we have in higher ed right now. And I'm going to turn it over to Dur for a quick introduction as well. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dervo Crowley. I'm the head of product at LeadSquared. I'm here tonight to answer any technical questions and I'm really excited to hear a lot about the ways that we can build and use technology to support the problems and the solutions that you're all looking to face over the next decades.
Great. Thanks, Dervin. Thanks, everybody. So today, we're going to talk about, how to decide about which new markets to enter. Amar touched on this, the build versus buy decision about how to execute, the use of technology. But, look, I think what we're really hoping to do is get some, one or two ideas that you can actually maybe take to bring to your campus. And I think we've got a panel that can provide some interesting ideas for you. We will have a Q&A at the end, but I would say don't wait until the end for your questions. Again, we encourage using the Q&A function or the chat function for your questions. We'll try to integrate those during the panel, and if there are again items that we can't during the panel, we can address those afterwards. So with that said, I think we'd like to jump right in. Look, this is incredibly timely about the enrollment challenges. Everyone's aware of it, and I don't think anyone can think about their model, their institution without thinking about new markets. And we define it just so we get kind of set the stage here. We're going to define new markets pretty broadly. So that can be new programs, it can be new geographies, it can be new student types, it can be new modalities. So, in this world, I think, the interesting time the pandemic somewhat accelerated it, but we've been living with what I call the new era of competition. We used to have geographic moats that sort of protected us, kind of the role of enrollment was really screening people. And now we actually have to be in the role of actually marketing and recruiting. So it's timely, and we need experts who are kind of at the front end of this to tell us, what's out there that might be working. And so that's actually where I'd like to start. We're going to jump into some other topics, but I think given we want to walk away with some tactical ideas, it would be great to hear from you exactly, give us an example or two, if you have to, of what's working on your campus in terms of a new market that you might be entering. And by the way, sorry, I'm going to interrupt myself here because it looks like the poll just popped up here. Are you currently exploring a new market? So if I can ask the attendees to jump in and answer that question, we'll see the results shortly. But back to my question to get a panelist going is let's talk about a specific, what are you working on? What were the results? And I'm going to cold call Monica to start us off.
I will happily take that cold call. So for American College of Education, when we think about new markets, obviously being an online institution, focused, primarily in education, the education vertical and the healthcare and nursing vertical, what we're seeing is really trying to go, the approach of trying to go where our learners are, right? And so for a specific example that I'd love to share with this group is really around looking at forming strategic partnerships with organizations, whether it be, you know, professional development organizations, if we think about education, right? And kind of the pathway in which learners go to be able to continue their education. Forming relationships with professional development organizations and or looking at professional development within corporations and or companies to be able to really focus on trying to provide pathways and also credit for learning that the learners may be doing that isn't necessarily coming from our institutions, right? And so for us, thinking about ways to be able to reduce time to completion, right? And then also by reducing time to completion, we're also having an impact on the overall cost for tuition. So that's one strategy that we've been using over the last 2 years that has really helped us expand in the market of education. And we've really started to just in the last, call it 6 to 12 months, expand in healthcare and nursing to where we're taking that deeper dive to find like organizations that we can collaborate with to provide pathways and programs that ultimately allow the learners to take previous experience and apply it to future learning. The second area that we've really started to put a focus on with regards to new markets is sitting down with district leaders, sitting down with hospital administration, and taking a more collaborative solution approach in that we obviously have our standard programs and standard products that we offer on an ongoing basis, but really trying to take the understanding from the organization and or the corporation's perspective of what their needs really are, and then trying to marry our offerings to those organizational needs. We're finding that it's opening up a lot of doors because the customization is needed, quite frankly, across multiple industries. And so by taking the time to learn what those organizational needs are, we're able then to marry and or quite frankly, develop new products and or programs to be able to meet those needs of the organization. So hopefully those two examples help the audience.
Monica, can I ask, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think for all our panelists, if you have any results, I mean, in other words, these ideas, if there's sort of things that you can say, this resulted in, you know, again, we're looking at, you know, sort of maybe the scale of these, or are they things that are more long-term, or are you seeing immediate impact?
Yeah, so I can share, I mean, for example, with one organization that we formed a strategic partnership where we're creating those pathways for professional development, we were able to successfully recruit about 150 students in a year from that specific partner. So not only did it allow us to expand our enrollment and recruitment, but in addition to, we were able to return the cost savings, right, by creating that pathway of transfer credit into our degree programs, which in return obviously impacted the learner in a very positive way. Does that help, James?
It's great. No, that's exactly, I mean, that's exactly, you're sort of talking about enrollment results. So who would like to follow? Tough act to follow. It sounds, you know, like, again, great pathways, relationships with corporations resulting in immediate enrollment growth. Amar, you want to follow up with that?
Yeah, and I really appreciate that answer from Monica. And for us at LMU, we've been a traditional residential undergraduate student, and you know, coming out of the pandemic and all the social upheaval, if you will, has made us sort of refocus on our primary mission, which is to serve students in line with our sort of traditional Jesuit Catholic values. And one area that we've identified is the adult learner, the degree completer market, which has been traditionally an area that has been not a strength of LMU per se, and we've really not focused our energies there. But we also believe that having those students come through our program and finishing our bachelor's degree with the prospect of moving forward and completing a master's degree in the future too could make them really viable. So in Southern California in particular, it is a highly competitive market, but it is a huge sort of population that still needs to be addressed in terms of the students that have stepped away from completing their bachelor's degree. So we've sort of gone back to the drawing board and really aligning with our mission and saying, well, this is our mission. We really want to be able to serve students. We have the capacity to be able to do it. And now we're building the online infrastructure to really be able to go after that market and particularly serve students that may not have had the opportunity to come to LMU in the first place. So much in alignment with the previous answer, we're looking forward to serving that new market for us.
Great. Stephanie, do you want to maybe any new markets that you're also exploring and anything that's working for you guys?
Sure, absolutely. So very similar to what Justamar said, Butler's founding mission is really to be able to serve all students. And over that time, we've really become more of a residential undergraduate institution. So we've been doing some kind of identity work and kind of getting back to our founding mission as well. So again, very similar to what Amar shared, we've recently launched 6 new graduate level programs in online education. Butler didn't have really some formalized online programs until a couple of years ago, so that's new for us. We also have a couple of new short-term credentials, kind of similar to what Monica was saying, where we co-created with partners in the state of Indiana to meet an employment need as well too. So really focusing on those that we are not currently serving, those that could benefit from a Butler education, as well as then really focusing on areas that are in high demand within the Indianapolis and greater community. We're also measuring results. One of the things we do at our institution is anytime that we create new programs or new models, we're really good about defining what a pilot looks like and what kind of results we're tracking. So that's something I would absolutely encourage everybody on this call to do, is what does success look like? And then have those quarterly sessions to be able to review. So did we hit our number of new students? How is our retention? What is the student evaluations, the course evaluations? How are the outcomes? What are the SLOs? What do we need to tweak? Because as you get into new markets, we think we know, and I know none of us have had this happen to us before. An idea looks really great on paper and then in reality doesn't go quite as planned. So I just really think that having that rigor around the tracking of the results is going to behoove all of us in the future as we explore new markets.
Great. Betty Jo, anything to add on anything you're doing at National Louis?
I get the luxury of going last on this particular question, which is great because my colleagues have done such a wonderful job covering so much territory, but also just to present the theme around mission alignment. I think that's what I heard in all 3 comments prior to. When we really think about our mission, it's about access and about economic stabilization of our prospective and current students. And so in that light, we set about launching a new division wholly focused on stackable credentials, very short term, and partnered with the employer to create a placement upon graduation so that our measurement, and for us, our big measure of success is return on investment in that first career. And certainly long-term, but that first career is the most, that first important step for us.
Great. Well, you're both, Stephanie and Betty Jo, you kind of teed us up for our next question a little bit about how do we think about new markets, but why don't we I saw the poll results, by the way, so 82%, if I saw it right, of folks listening are currently exploring new markets. There it is. Can we also actually, before we jump into the next question, maybe tee up the second poll question, which is, in the audience, what new markets are they exploring? And again, I think it'll sort of provide context for kind of the next question, which is, all right, let's good to tee up, what's working. It sounds like we have a couple different, new demographics, new modalities, new pathways to get to new students. But how do you think, look, we all have limited resources. my sense is you can't do everything, right? Like you can't go international and online and serve adult learners and serve undergrad. So how do you prioritize those? And I there's a lot of different ways you can do it, but Stephanie, I know you have a unique vantage on this in that your office actually sits and plays a strategic role in this. So and by the way, just looking at the poll question, we'll real time it here, I guess. It looks pretty evenly spread. It looks like people are trying to do everything. So take that back. You can't do everything, Dorothy. So new geography, new student demo, new programs, new modalities. Again, it just shows. Look, I think this is more symptomatic of that everybody needs to do everything they can. But Stephen, back to the kind of process. Like how, I mean, and some of you touched on it, mission alignment, sort of setting the, what are the metrics for success, but I'd love to hear kind of how you think about maybe each campus. How do you prioritize? How do you kind of think about which, and maybe just on your campus?
Yeah, sure. Happy to start us off, and I'm sure my colleagues will have great items to share as well. But as James alluded to, that's literally the job of the Transformation Lab at Butler, is exploring new markets and figuring out which ones do we go after first. So I better be able to say a few things about that. So with that being said, I think the first important thing to realize is that one, you say yes to everything, you're actually saying no to moving things forward. So we have to be able to say no to be able to say yes. So that's an important concept. And then the second thing, just kind of a guiding principle, is that if we don't have a process to evaluate ideas, then it's really easy to chase the shiny objects. And the shiny objects emerge all different places in higher ed, and they may sound really great, but they may not end up being the one where you get the most value. So I encourage everyone to think of some sort of process to be able to use. So I'm going to talk a little bit of how we do that at Butler University and in the Transformation Lab. Right now, some for practical guidance. And again, always happy to provide more insight later on if anyone is interested. So we have set up the Transformation Lab, as I alluded to in my introduction. It is an R&D unit for the university. And so ideas that fall in the white spaces, so those ideas that are the big ones where it's everybody's responsibility, but yet nobody's responsibility, that are really transformational and messy, are the ones that we get. So it's our job to then own those. So there's an owner of that and be able to shepherd those forward. And we use a 6-stage innovation gate process. So we start with ideate, assess, validate, design, pilot, and then launch. And there's very specific subcategories and different items that we're accountable for producing in each of those. And the most important thing is, after all of those stage gates, we're asking ourselves, do we want to move forward? And as you get more information, sometimes the best ideas are the ones that end up not seeming so great. And some ideas that came forward before that may seem small end up having a lot of opportunities. So I think that's important to know, is sometimes that's where that shiny object chasing it may not be the best approach. So some of the questions we ask ourselves, and again, I'm happy to go more in detail if ever needed, or if anyone's interested later, not for this session, is we ask ourselves right off the gate, is this strategically aligned with our direction, and is it mission aligned? If not, that's a no. That's a no. We also ask ourselves, does it support growth into new markets? So a lot of that is a really important distinction. There is a lot of items are interesting, but they're the same markets. We may end up cannibalizing some of the current offerings. So are we really getting into new markets? And then also we ask ourselves, does this have potential for substantial impact and be able to scale? If so, then we prioritize the projects, and we do that on the number of potential new lives that we would have the ability to impact by enrolling them at Butler University, the potential goals of the institution. So some of our projects are more mission aligned than others, and that's equally as important. Of course, we consider different kind of revenue and costs. And then we also consider something that I think we alluded to in the first is, do we have a really engaged partner? Is this aligning with a need right now in our community in Indiana? And how can we then be able to partner with either organizations, our city, our state, or other kind of learners to be able to really move this forward? So we have a rubric that helps us be able to distinguish that and be able to stack rank those priorities. But those are some of the questions that we use to guide our thinking. And I think Betty Jo, I think you were going to chime in after that, James, or I don't know if you have any other things that we want to add there. Betty Jo, do you want to
No,
add in?
the only thing I actually, because we had a question from the audience on it, just if anybody wants to weave it in, if there are tools you're using, like market research tools or things that, people can lean on.
So we use Gray's Associates for market research. We've also used MC Burning Glass in the past, but use Gray's now. We also have Business Model Canvas that we use to be able to help us be able to evaluate ideas. And then again, we have a 6-stage gate of innovation process. And in all of those, we have different kind of deliverables that we're giving and all of that. So we use a lot of tools to be able to help us, as well as some innovation management software via Bright Idea.
Awesome. Betty Jo?
Yeah, so I speak to the technology tool first. So MC is our primary vehicle that we'll sort of use for looking at the landscape for a new program. And have used Gray's in the past as well. I think one of the things I would say around choosing new markets is absolutely, to Stephanie's point, having a rubric and/or a process by which ideas are vetted is critically important, especially if you're a smaller institution that doesn't have, huge funds to really kind of spin up new ideas and see how they work. Though I did also want to say and maybe challenge the you can't do it all at once, sort of commentary in the beginning is you kind of do have to do it all at once. I think the question is how much time and funds you devote to each area or each way you can grow. So the poll was sort of designed in that classic strategy Ansoff matrix way, right? Where you're looking at existing products in existing markets, your existing programs in new markets, new products in new markets, and then that new, right? So I think the idea that you just pick one or two might be narrow, right? So it's about percentage of time, perhaps percentage of attention and funds that get dedicated to each of these categories so that you can kind of fail fast and know that you have something else to sort of catch you if something doesn't, really make it to that success gate. And the reason I say that that's really important, and I don't think, I think this would be rather silly for me to state this as if it's new information, but since higher ed is evolving at the speed that it is, if we're not continuing to think a few years down the road and kind of fail, sort of future proofing our universities and college settings, I would argue that we might quickly fall behind.
Yeah, and I can continue on. I would agree with you wholeheartedly, Betty Jo, in regards to how quickly we could fall behind, right? If we're not thinking 2 to 5 years, out as far as program development goes. For our institution specifically, we leverage Gray's data to help provide informed decision making with regards to new programs and new product that we're potentially also influencing new markets, right, as well. And for us, there's a 5-year program map that's ever evolving, quite frankly. What was on the map 2 months ago has already changed, for what we're looking forward to in the next 3 to 6 months. And so I think to speak to Betty Jo's point, you have to be extremely nimble and have multiple plates spinning, quite honestly, because the market is changing, and we're hearing a lot about more of the micro credential approach, right, and helping learners break down their credentials into more of a bite-sized approach. And so I think we have to always be looking for alternative ways to craft the product and craft the program to meet the learners' needs at where they are. And so that would be where we stand from the perspective of new markets and really new programs is one of the key ways that fosters growth at American College of Education.
Mar?
So I'll jump in here and say that whether you do one thing at a time or do 5 things at a time really depends on if you've aligned resources for it, right? And so if you are at an institution that is planning to do either or, hopefully you have the ability to voice that in some formal way and make it a part of the institutional strategic plan, because shortly after that plan is confirmed, that's where all the resources will come in. So everything that's been said by my colleagues here is absolutely correct. The only thing I would add is just make sure it is somehow integrated at the start of the strategic plan, that if you're in the midst of, perhaps now is a good time to sort of say, hey, we need to do 3 or 4 things, and we're going to need some resources behind it, and we're going to probably fail at 1 or 2 of those. But if we get the other 2 right, then that'll work out, and that'll hopefully drive all of the decision making that comes forward with selecting the right partners and so on and so forth. So I'll just add that.
Well, the guys are doing this great. It's like I'm teed up from question to question. So I think the resource point is exactly, look, at the end of the day, all my clients aspire to do lots of things, but at the end of the day, it does come down to dollars that they can invest. And it goes to the point about partnerships, perhaps with outside entities that we've discussed. That you can only do so much with limited resources. We have, particularly in the area, let's just use online as an example. We've seen a ton of, Monica, your institution is a little unique in that you're sort of built from the ground up. A lot of institutions are just kind of starting to move in that arena, and found that the marketing, the enrollment, the course development often were things that cost a lot of money. They didn't have the in-house resources to build. We've seen that in international markets as well. We don't have 50 agents all over the world like ourselves. So the issue of partnership and core competency, I kind of agree with you guys that the universities need to, well, I 100% agree that we all need to be focused on, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years ahead and future-proof your institution. I think it's a question of how you execute on it, though, because again, with limited resources, are there things that, if you think of the core competency of an institution, teaching, learning, research, and then there are certain things that we've been outsourcing for a long time. On ground food service, everybody uses agencies, have been forever. So I want to ask a little bit about partnerships. It's important. First of all, as a poll question here, poll number 3 is, I think, just to get a sense of who's working with partners to explore new markets. It's an open-ended question about build versus buy, but I'd love to get your thoughts, the panelists' thoughts on this. Mara, I know you've done some research. By the way, I have done a horrible job. I did not plug this book, but 3 of the panelists have a writing in here. Betty Jo's an editor. This is a great book. And this chapter here about online partnerships. And Mara, I know you've done some research along with Michael Graham at National Louis, which is the only research, and we need more about this, about these partnerships, and it's timely. There's a lot of thought about that. So with that, I'd love, kind of your thoughts about partnerships broadly, and any insights you have either from your research or from your experience.
Yeah, thank you for that. And this remains a fascinating topic of discussion, debate at various institutions. And every time I'm done talking about the chapter or presenting something, I always get folks coming in and asking me whether they should continue with an OPM partnership or not. And so what I will say in having studied this for a little bit and learned from the institutions is there are 3 or 4 elements that really drive success or failure when it comes to deciding whether to insource or outsource, really. And the first one is one that we've just been talking about, which is how does all of this align with your strategic plan, if you have it in a plan? Because at the end of the day, if there is a misalignment between what your strategic goals are and you bring in a partner, you're probably setting yourself up for failure. And then we're probably going to hear about you in the news. We don't want any of that, right? So I think that's sort of the first and foremost thing that comes along with it. I think the institutions that have found great success in doing that, regardless of their structure, right? So some are centralized institutions, some are decentralized. And so partnerships typically live with either an academic college, typically a business or an engineering college that has sort of gone forth and said, yes, we're going to grow in a certain area, or it lives in a more centralized role with someone like myself, or even Betty Jo and Stephanie and even Monica might be in charge of these sort of partnerships. And I think having a champion is really, really important, because there is a lack of understanding within the institution of what it means to partner with an OPM. we're all using a ton of partners, be it marketing, and you, James, said, when it comes to catering and whatnot. But I think that given that this is such a core function of what we do as higher education institutions, I think there's sort of a fundamental lack of understanding of where a partner can come in and help us and where they cannot. And so my third point to that would be to say that we need, as an institution, to have a clear understanding of where the gaps are. Do you need instructional design support? Do you need marketing resources? Do you need student support resources? And oftentimes institutions that have been able to define it at the onset have found that they have had successful partnerships, regardless of whether they've given up, half of their revenue or not. I've talked to folks that have said, hey, we gave up 50% of our revenue, but guess what? We wouldn't have had all of these students and not even had that other 50% of the revenue if that didn't happen. And on the flip side, we've heard and probably read about a lot of complaints about having to give up all this revenue in exchange for what appears to be a very sort of minimal growth in students. So I think that is sort of the first three elements that every institution needs to consider when jumping into a partnership or not, sort of a question. And I don't know who's going to go next on this, but I know my colleague.
Well, I know that, look, you've teed up a lot. There's a lot. Look, and I would say that the other thing that, just to kind of throw out, that I've seen is that that entering these new markets costs a lot. Like there is a new era of understanding what it costs to grow outside of your local geography, and whether you do it yourself or whether you let a partner do it, it's probably a number that is much greater than you're used to in doing sort of local brand marketing. I mean, like, that's just a reality. And so anyone want to look, there's nuance. I don't know if I want, let's throw up the poll about OPMs just to put that on the table. I don't, and I don't want this to be purely about OPMs, but if anyone wants to comment, I know some of you have experience with using, and maybe just definitionally for our audience. So online OPMs are typically meant to be these organizations that do multiple services for an institution, and often it's kind of associated with revenue share. So they're doing this bundle of services: marketing, market research, marketing, recruiting, some student support, and sometimes kind of optionally instructional design. That world is, also can be unpacked, and all of those institutions are also separately, can be fee-for-service agencies, just like you have. They can be fee-for-service instructional design shops. They don't have, like, the terms are kind of blended a little bit, but I just want to clarify that it's, and by the way, so 70, all right, here we go, 25% using an OPM, 75% no. I'd be curious if, if we ask sort of how many of you are working with fee-for-service partners to do anything in that value chain. I'm guessing we might be flipped. But anyone want to talk about OPM? Why don't we go tee off that or other partnerships kind of to achieve your enrollment goals or enter new markets?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in really quick, James. I think everything that Amar said is really important around sort of what are the competencies that you leverage internally to make these decisions. And to James's point, entering a new market with a new product is the riskiest, most expensive bet that can be placed in this growth space, which is why, kind of going back to that first question, that you really need to be thinking about growth in multiple ways, right? And one of those, friends, I'm here to tell you, is your existing programs in your existing markets. I would argue that many of us sort of take our current status as just the status. This is what it is, and it will always be this way. What we know is that it will not. There's a tremendous amount of seasonality in many of our programs and how they perform over time. But there is also this kind of Hawthorne effect that we can see in some of our existing portfolios to say, well, even if we just gave it some more attention, right? Let's retrain our, enrollment and admission folks, and let's really bring this top of mind, and or let's invest a little bit more in the marketing of this particular program. These things can be tweaked, to Stephanie's point earlier, to see if you can get a little bit of a lift in your existing portfolio as well, because that is going to be your least expensive, most impactful growth space. And so I don't want to minimize the actual topic of our webinar by saying also please look at your existing portfolio, but please also look at your existing portfolio.
And I would actually echo that, Betty Jo, because I think that's where you see really incremental growth opportunities by honing in. And one of the things that we've started doing is a quarterly program health evaluation in collaboration with enrollment, student services, academics, the faculty, to really be able to find the areas of opportunity to enhance the current offerings. The other thing that I would add from just a partnership perspective, obviously with us being a fully online institution, we don't leverage an OPM, but where we look for partnerships is really to enhance our product, right? And finding the subject matter experts that can partner alongside us to be able to continue to foster that quality content and curriculum throughout the programs, because of the fact that we offer some very niche programs with regards to specific curricular needs. And so that's just something to always keep in the back of your mind as well, is you may not have to go all in, but finding a partner that would be willing to sit alongside you to help, create new curriculum and or to help, quite frankly, recraft what you already have on the shelf is another angle that I know we at American College of Education always lean into to be able to help provide that additional support and elevate the content.
Yeah, and just to add on, I agree with everything that's been said, but getting back to like the initial question, I think that James asked of us, which is, do you build or buy? Do you partner with somebody when getting into a new market? And I would also argue and contend that could be a yes, and maybe you build and buy, and that it may not be just like as we started this conversation, it may not be a one size fits all. I would also argue with what, I would also agree with, but argue with what Betty just said earlier, is that I do think we need to be considering all markets. We would do ourselves a disservice if we put our blinders on right away and say, this is the area I'm going, because again, things can change. If we haven't learned anything in the last 3 years, life can change on a dime and in an instant. So I think we need to consider everything as far as markets, but same thing with partnerships is perhaps you do build one from the ground up. Perhaps you do partner for another one. Perhaps with an OPM, you choose certain services and not others, and you play to your strengths. So again, I just would challenge our thinking and everybody's thinking on the call that it doesn't have to be a one size fits all approach, and it doesn't have to be a blanket build or buy for everything that you're doing as you're thinking new markets.
If I may, James, just jump in on one quick thing. I think the question of whether to bring a partner on board or do it yourself also is determined by what your goals are, right? What do you expect in terms of just sheer enrollments? If your goal at an institution like LMU is for us to build incrementally around the strengths we already have, and we're not necessarily in dire straits, if you will, in terms of just regular enrollment, we're looking to build around the edges. So for me, launching a new program with 25 to 30 odd students a year might just be sufficient. And in which case I may or may not really need a partner to have that aggressive growth that someone else might desire. On the other hand, if you're an institution that wants that aggressive growth, then you might consider bringing a partner on board just to supercharge, to boost your ability to do so, even if you have those resources. So I think in the past, the sort of the thinking has been that if you don't have resources, then you just sort of bring in a partner. But given today's context, and you mentioned earlier that we no longer need to buy services as a bundle, they can be unbundled. And therefore you could use strategically some of your funding on capitalizing on marketing and advertising, which is traditionally a very expensive sort of endeavor for any of us that are in the higher education space. So an OPM might be a good partner to bring in that particular situation, whereas you go ahead and build capabilities in other areas. So I think it again goes back to what do you think your goals will be, what your timeline will be, and how soon you really want to get to where you want to get to.
right? For about a decade, we've advised universities on these kind of partnerships, and my sense is that Tim Kaine spoke at our keynote. Senator Tim Kaine from Virginia spoke keynote at P3DU, and he said, my colleagues on the right who say public-private partnerships are for this resolution to everything are wrong, and those on the left who say we don't want to touch them are probably wrong. It is literally how I think in every case, each institution has to figure it out for themselves, feel like you said, align the fit to what they want to achieve, and also to frankly hold everybody accountable. That's kind of the main, and do the math and the numbers to kind of know, to make sure everybody's being honest. All right, let's switch gears maybe a little more narrowly around partnerships, but specifically around technology. Everybody has new systems to hold data. There's more data than ever. And I'd love some thoughts specifically about how we can leverage data and or technology to better achieve new market growth and or student success for that matter. But Betty Jo, I know you guys have done a lot of work in National Louis in this area. I'd love any thoughts, and again, all the panelists, love your thoughts on sort of use of technology specifically.
Sure. And maybe I will take you up on the second piece of your question there, James, around student success, which obviously will relate to that new market entry and how your brandy new students that you brought in are doing in that new program that you've spent all of that time, energy, and resource into launching. So one of the things that I think we sometimes overlook around the use of data is the amount of data we have on our students, everything from pre-enrollment all the way through to what are they doing in their courses. Even as even just in the words I just used, the digital footprint being created by an individual student is kind of mind-blowing, right? 13 million text messages were just sent out by when I started speaking, right? So the amount of data is just overwhelming. The real key is to find out what is important at your institution for your students, right? So it's not looking at all the data. It's trying to look at 5 or 6 or 7 pieces of data that will indicate to you how you need to support your students better. So we're mining data from our pre-enrollment systems in Salesforce and another CRM and Banner and our learning management system and our student success platform, and pulling that into a very large and deep data lake that then is visualized in Power BI to say, here are the things that we have found strong correlations on over time at NLU, also leveraged, or sort of evidenced by the literature to say, these are the things to focus on and to take action on. And this action orientation is really important for us at NLU because our students are, again, back to our access focused. We are our access focus. We're here to help them stabilize economically and socioeconomically. So we take this very, very seriously, right? These data that indicate that something might happen. They might drop out or not graduate or not get that job. So we're taking action on these things and following up on these things all day long as we speak.
Anyone else want to talk about data, and particularly anybody who wants to talk about on the enrollment side as well? I love but on both, if we can, student success and enrollment.
Yeah, I'll jump in on the enrollment side because I think that part of where the enrollment profession is going is that we now have moved the admissions officers from sort of looking at files and doing paperwork to now in this sort of hyper technological state of implementing systems and recognizing how to communicate with students. And I think that the greatest challenge for the enrollment side of the house is training our staff to be able to not just use all the technology that we have, but really being able to assess the data that is available, analyze it in a way that can then be used to inform future recruitment strategies and better select students in the instances where we have. So that remains an ongoing challenge, and we're seeing a lot of technology development companies that put out these these softwares really offer a lot of data and training on how to best utilize these systems. So that remains the next frontier. I sort of want to tie it back to our last question of, we're talking about insourcing or outsourcing, but it may well be that your enrollment team has that strength, right? If you invest enough in bringing them up to speed and being able to be effective recruiters, then it sort of ties back into the idea of having that support system that really enables you to get to your goals.
Anyone else want to follow up? Nope. Look, it's interesting though. I do find that if you ask most universities, most traditional on ground, they would probably, if you said, what is your cost per start by lead channel? My guess is that would be a tough answer. In part because they may not think entirely that way. Secondly, the systems may be there, but it's not configured in a way to capture it in a way to pull it out. I think it's an ongoing area that's going to Mar's point, I think you're going to see more and more training around that and more custom work around data. I'm looking here and seeing some questions that are coming up in the chat, and I'd love to maybe open it up. Okay, let's see. Here's an example. I'm looking at one here. Can you give examples of programs developed based upon market research? The micro-credential approach was mentioned. What additional approaches you observed as an effective way to meet students where they're at? Anyone want to take it? Like, I think that the question sounds like it's, when you're kind of looking at pure market data and then sort of using that to implement something. Does anyone want to kind of give an example of that? Okay. Oh, Amar.
Well, I'll jump in. I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, I think market research is an integral part of developing a program, whether you go forward with it or not. I think what we do at LMU here is we identify what strengths we have already. So we have, for example, an MBA program that is very effective, but has been served primarily face-to-face, and we're now in the process of bringing those programs online. But online MBA programs are available in the hundreds, if not thousands now. I think we're probably one of the last institutions to do it. So for us, we're leveraging market research to figure out exactly what specialties we can focus on. We're also identifying student demographics that might fit our sort of program very well. And since we're at the end of this revolution, if you will, we're sort of finding the gaps in the market to really go after that. So I think that's where market research can be helpful, really to identify the landscape and say, okay, this is where you might have a few lanes to explore.
Yeah, and maybe I would add to that around, the question that talked about meeting students where they're at and what we might mean by that. For us, we have a fairly rigorous system of pulse checking with our current student population to get to just that. We do that through a Noah Levitt's instrument that is particular to online students, but then we also have a wider distribution across our on-campus students as well. But we also do rounds of applications of other rubrics and frameworks from the Online Learning Consortium and Quality Matters to say, are we serving our students in the best way? And, what are our evaluations and how do we get data to sort of fuel those evaluations? But most importantly, how do we start closing these gaps? And then, this idea that we would just survey our students and maybe take action would sound probably reductionist, because we're also taking the time to do some focus groups with our online students to say, here's what we found. Here are the gaps that we've identified. Are these things that you would want? Are these things that would be of interest to you? What would you tell us? We want to make sure that we're designing systems and supports and programs that our students truly want, and they're the best people to tell us in most cases.
Yeah, and I can have a little bit different tilt on that, if that helps. I think some of the questions was, can we give an example of a program that we've developed based on market research and kind of some of the tips and tricks that we've been talking about today. So I'm happy to give an example. We actually have co-created a new early childhood education credential certificate that will be launching this summer. And we partnered with Early Learning Indiana, which is actually one of the state arms of early childhood education within the state of Indiana. And I think some of the question there was also like, how do you do that to meet the needs? Well, it was a lot of co-creation with actually the people that are in the early childhood classrooms and the people working at those centers. So we did a lot of deep dive into what those personas are, what the needs of those potential students would be, what those wraparound services, because I think that's another important component too. I know we've talked about student support here, but we need to make sure we're meeting the curriculum and delivery where those students are, but we also need to make sure we have the right services to be able to support students as a whole, not just as a student. And I sometimes we forget about that because we think of our students as in the classroom and not all the different kind of competing interests. So we did that. It was a very design process where we went back to the basics of some of the design, the why, what's the problem, what are we addressing, and who, and really a human-centered design approach for those individuals. And that does have a need in Indiana. So I think there's another question about geographic and market. And we also went to really what the state needs and what the Indianapolis needs are to be able to help inform that as well too. So that's just an example of how that can work.
Okay, looks like we have another question came in specifically about boosting enrollment. And I'm not reading the question entirely right, but it looks like it's about new geographic markets. And look, I know National Louis actually started a second campus from Chicago and Tampa. That's one way to do it. Actually have a second campus. My sense is that that's an option, but I'm curious if everyone, particularly those that are experimenting with online, the historic rule of thumb is that the 50-mile, 100-mile radius is still where your fully online students are coming from. I'd love any thoughts about that. And if there's experience, like, how do you go beyond? I mean, how do you, and look, this is why people often think of OPMs. It's like, hey, we think this program has national or beyond appeal, but how do you break out of geographic barriers? And maybe I'll just kind of open that up. If anyone has thoughts.
I'll take it from an online perspective. We really have focused at ACE on building our demographics around where our alumni are. So if you think about, again, online, we have representation across the entire United States and internationally, but where we've seen accelerated growth is really focusing in on where we have large populations of alumni. Because, quite frankly, happy students will share their experience. And so leveraging our alumni to help foster relationships, either whether it be within, districts and or within hospital systems or other organizations, has really been an area that's helped foster new enrollment growth for us as an organization.
It's great. Anyone else thoughts about kind of busting down geographic barriers? But I like that, focus on where your alumni are. Okay, second question just is the let's see, the 100-mile, do people like, does that, maybe we can do a head nod on that. Is online still 50, 100-mile? Yes, no, or is online, if you put it out there, you can go bigger?
Ours is about 150 miles. And then we kind of look at the contiguous, can we bleed a little bit out of that, but.
Got it.
Ours is to some extent, but then we've also found markets with students that share some of the same attributes that are quote unquote local within 100-mile sort of radius students share, and we found some success doing that, expanding.
Well, I'm being told that we are running out of time here. These things always go fast. I'm hoping that the audience has a chance to text with any questions. I think folks can follow up afterwards. But again, I think that's all we have time for today. And I'm gonna hand it over. Thank you all, and hand it over to Derv from LeadSquared.
Hey, thank you, James. It was our pleasure to have you all on our innovative panel join us today. We at LeadSquared really appreciate you taking the time to share your experiences and expertise. And I think it's comfortable to say that we all learned an awful lot. I also want to thank Inside Higher Ed for their help setting up today's webinar. To our audience, we'll follow up with you. We hope we have the opportunity to chat with you more about your pain points in the future and generally CRM, automation, etc. We hope you have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye now.